welcome back with Fight Night Picks. It's another episode of Parry Counter, and you, yes, you at home, you drive this show. We're answering your burning MMA questions. You can throw them down below in the comments section. As always, one half your host, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. Many have in the past, and that's where they're throwing some of these questions as well. You can find Matt at Matt Allen FNP. So what we're doing this week, probably one of my favorite pieces of content we've ever done with Fight Night Picks. And if you're new to the train that is the FNP Nation, it's something that we started off in 2019. We did a heavyweight bracket. It was March Madness style, and some people tuned in. And then in 2020, we broke it down even further. We did it division by division, all the way from flyweight up to heavyweight. Well, MikeySports threw it out there in the comments section when we decided we bring back Parry Counter for this year. And he said, yeah, I want to see those divisional Grand Prix coming back into style. We threw it out there on Reddit, r/MMA, the great people out there, the true hardcores. And we said, listen, it's a one-night 16-man featherweight Grand Prix. Who moves on to the round of 8? And a lot of people took issue with the seeding. So for the purposes of the video today, I took the seeding out of it. These are just strictly matchups that were chosen at random. And we're going to throw them up there on the screen. You'll get a good look at them. But overall, I could not be more excited. Because like I said, this is one of my favorite things to do.
And it's a great division, too, just to pat ourselves in the back. I mean, featherweight right now is as exciting as any division, and the good thing about featherweight, lightweight kind of had this issue, if you want to even call it an issue, for a little while. It's not just a great weight division with entertainment, it's got big names in it too, and it was fun trying to pick some names from outside the UFC to try to compare, okay, how would they look if they did get that big opportunity to fight the likes of, an Alexander Volkanovski or a Calvin Kattar. So I think this could be a lot of fun. Let's get into it.
KSW, one championship, PFL, UFC, Bellator, everybody out there is included in this one. Featherweight, I can't wait for it. So as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. So just like, March Madness style bracket, we do have the fighters up in front of you. Now, again, seeding means absolutely nothing in this spot. We have Calvin Kattar taking on AJ McKee in the opening matchup. Patricio Pitbull taking on Saladin Palnas, your KSW champion. He was able to get his belt back in the last calendar year. Mavlid Haibulaev, your champion, over with PFL, taking on Giga Chikadze. Arnold Allen taking on Hands of Stone, John Lineker. Now, if you're a one championship fan, they call it bantamweight, but realistically, it is at featherweight. Can you believe that this guy used to compete at flyweight? Absolutely insane there. We also have Yair Rodriguez rematching with the Korean Zombie in the opening bout. Dan Ige, Alexander Volkanovski. You have Mads Burnell taking on Max Holloway, and Brian Ortega taking on Josh Emmett. So on the left hand of the screen, you have my bracket. On the right hand, we have Matt's bracket, and they'll follow along with the picks that we have for these. But if we start up at the top, Calvin Kattar, AJ McKee is such an interesting matchup because for McKee, he's kind of a Swiss Army knife. I mean, some fights he's creating his own submissions, the likes of which we've never seen before when he took on Darian Caldwell. And then he goes out there and takes on Patricio Pitbull and knocks his head off and looks amazing. Taking on Calvin Kattar, that is a steady Eddie, but always improving as he goes along with his career, as evidenced by his last fight against Giga Chikadze.
100%. And the good thing about AJ McKee is that he's not just good everywhere, he's dangerous everywhere. He can finish you on the feet. He can finish you with a submission. It's not just the fact that, he can kind of hold his own in all those areas. We've seen him submit world-class grapplers. We've seen him knock out really good strikers. So the fact that he was able to kind of be the prospect who became what we all kind of hoped he was going to become really is nice to see, because how many times has it happened in the UFC, or really even take it outside of MMA? How many times has it happened in sports where you have a hyped-up prospect, they have that eye-catching talent, but maybe they don't have the work ethic, maybe they don't have the cardio, or some of the extra intangibles that you sort of look for when you look at the people who are going to make it to the next level? AJ McKee has all those things, and he just kept on getting better too, which is really nice to see. But like you had said for Calvin Kattar, we've never seen a better version of Kattar than the guy who we just saw fight Giga Chikadze, and that's why I think this fight would be so much fun if we ever did get to see it, because Kattar, he had trouble with guys who could throw a lot of kicks earlier on in his career, but we're starting to see him kind of play the cerebral game. It's like, okay, if I don't kickbox kickboxers, I'll have a lot more success. Maybe if I just turn every fight into a boxing fight, I'll have a lot of success, and it's worked out great for him. This fight would be amazing. Like, it is hypothetical, and this was the thing too. When we put this bracket together, I was kind of worried who McKee got matched up with early, because he is so good and we know how dominant he is in Bellator. I don't think this would be an easy fight for him at all.
No, it wouldn't be the easiest of fights, but I could see this one going the distance. And again, this is a one-night tournament, so you have to factor in damage, you have to factor in strength of schedule. In this fight, when I do look at it, though, AJ McKee is one of those guys, like a Khamzat Chimaev is right now. He's the uncrowned champ. He is undefeated so far. Listen, Sean O'Malley was one of those hyped up prospects like a McKee, suffered the loss to Vera, and really hasn't taken on the hardest level competition. You can say some similar things for McKee over with Bellator, but he continues to excel against the guys they throw in front of him. So I have AJ McKee winning this fight against Calvin Kattar, albeit maybe not the easiest fight, but I do have him winning this one.
So you have him winning by decision?
Yeah, I'm going to say decision.
I'm going to agree with you on that, but I think this should be like fight of the night, fight of the bracket type stuff, and only our first fight. I really do, because maybe this is, a precursor to how this tournament is going to go, but I do think McKee would take some damage in this fight, more so than what we've seen in any Bellator fight up until this point.
I don't see it being that bad, but maybe that's precursor for more to come. Our next fight, Patricio Pitbull taking on Saladin Palnas. And for Saladin Palnas, I mean, he's such an impressive prospect. If you haven't happened to see him over with KSW, he was able to debut at KSW 41 back in 2017. In that fight, he was at the ripe age of 20 years old, just 2 weeks past 20, and he's looked amazing since his lone loss to Daniel Torres, where it was a fluky one. He walked into, was it a jab? Was it a forearm? It was just the weirdest thing. Even when you watch the highlights, it's just kind of hard to comprehend how he got finished in that one. Since that loss to Torres, he was able to beat Philip Paich, and he finished him in the second round, and then he was able to beat Daniel Torres for the belt back in December. You're taking on Patricio Pitbull, who, yes, did lose to AJ McKee in his last fight, but he's a buzzsaw. Just look at his finish win over Michael Chandler if you want some evidence to that one. I look at this fight as a great prospect against a guy who was just a champion with super, super knockout power. I see Patricio Pitbull winning this fight, and fairly handily.
So do I, and I could see him getting another one of those quick finishes. We know how good he is on the ground and on the feet, and the weird thing about Palnas, just sort of a side note, is he one of like the few fighters who the more successful they've got, the more wild they've kind of got too, because earlier on in his career, he was a great striker, he was super technical, but he won a bunch of decisions, and yes, they were one-sided, but for the most part, you could tell that he was almost kind of holding back a little bit. He does leave himself more open at this stage of his career, but I would say his fights have gotten tremendously more exciting later on, because he does leave himself wide open, which allows him to go for the finish more offensively. But like you said, if you leave yourself open against a guy like Pitbull, you're going to walk into a big shot.
So both of us in this one going Patricio Pitbull, right?
Probably by stoppage too.
All right, so we're both going with the man himself, Pitbull. Now our next fight, we have Mavlid Haibulev taking on Giga Chikadze, and listen, over on Reddit, the most downvoted comment of the entire thing was, LMAO, why not toss Giga in there for the shits and giggles? And when I look at this matchup, yeah, Giga Chikadze just lost to Calvin Kattar. So what? And we've seen in his fights, his wrestling defense has gotten a little bit better. His, defensive movements on the ground. He is no Francis Ngannou on the ground by any means, but as a primary striker, he's gotten better. I think Mavlid Haibulev, he was in the UFC. I know he's 19-0-1 over there with PFL. You look at the guys he's fought, he completely out-wrestled and outclassed Chris Wade in his last fight. Chris Wade's a super wrestler. Mavlid Haibulev was all over him. He beat Brendan Loughnane before that. He beat Lance Palmer. And he beat Lazar Stojanovic in 2021. Lance Palmer, Brendan Loughnane, and Chris Wade are some of the best wrestlers you're ever going to fight, and he out-wrestled them. And oh, by the way, if you want to see some big finishes, when he was able to take on Damon Jackson, the most disgusting knockout I've ever seen in 2019, I look at this fight as, yes, I think Giga Chikadze is still of the elite in the featherweight division, or he wouldn't have made this bracket of 16. But man, I think really highly of Mavlid Haibulev. I have him winning this fight. It definitely could go to decision. He wrestles himself quite a bit, but I have Haibulev in this one.
I also have Haibulev, but I will say this. Calvin Kattar kind of found this out too. When Daniel Cormier put the mic in Calvin Kattar's face and said, "How do you feel after that win?" Kattar was pretty honest. You know what he said? Not that good. Like, I got hit in the head a lot of times. And that is the thing when you're fighting Giga Chikadze. He really proved that, like, and Craig hates this term, he's got that dog in him. Like, when the going gets tough, Giga Chikadze gets tough himself. So I do agree with you with the result. I do think Haibulev would win with his grappling, but I think he would probably eat a few big shots on his way to get the win.
I have him just going to a decision. Again, we might differ as this goes on. Again, my bracket's on the left, Matt's is on the right. Our next fight, we have Arnold Allen taking on the Hands of Stone, John Lineker. Now, again, John Lineker is a very, very small guy, and now that he's over with one championship, he's a bantamweight, but he weighs in at 145. So again, with hydration testing and everything, Arnold Allen's going to be cutting to 145, where John Lineker is going to be kind of in and around 145. And for Allen, his next fight's against Dan Hooker. That one's coming up in March. For John Lineker, his next fight's against Bibby, who I absolutely love. And listen, an adopted Canadian here on the West Coast, but Viviano Fernandez, they fight in early February. I'm going to be glued to my TV for that fight because Fernandez just doesn't fight very often. But if you look at it for the man himself, Hands of Stone, he goes over to one championship after losing to Corey Sandhagen by split decision in 2019. And he gets a win over Gafurov. He gets a win over Bellingon, who's a super fighter, finishes him in the second round. Knocks out Troy Worthen in the, first round of their fight on TNT. John Lineker still has it, and if anything, he's kind of gained a step since he's gone over to one championship, not taking on the highest level of competition. This fight's a tricky one, because Lineker's in it to win it, but I see Arnold Allen winning a decision.
I never gave Arnold Allen the respect he deserved, but it's time for me to finally do that. He beat the brakes off Sadiq Youssef and, didn't eat a single power shot in that fight. And Sadiq Youssef's a really, really good fighter who has absurd power for the weight division. And Arnold Allen went in there, dropped Youssef, out-grappled Youssef. The thing about Arnold Allen is he's kind of similar to the champ Volkanovski to where he's just good at everything. You don't look at the game of Arnold Allen and think, wow, he has a weakness in his wrestling, or wow, his striking, if he only threw in combination more. No, he's great across the board, and that is kind of the thing. To beat John Lineker, you can't go in there and try to trade bombs with him. If you do that, you're going to end up getting knocked out. But if you are that well-rounded kind of mixed martial artist, normally you can have your way with someone like Lineker. So I will admit, if this was one of those this is the best fight of the tournament type of fights, it would probably result with John Lineker dropping Arnold Allen, choking him out with a guillotine like he did to Francisco Rivera all that time ago. But I see Arnold Allen probably going in there and jabbing John Lineker 450 times.
Lineker's fought big guys in the past. We already talked about Corey Sandhagen, but he gives up about 5 inches of height and 7 inches of reach in a fight against Arnold Allen, whose distance management is great, and I bet his dad would probably scare John Lineker on the way in. So we move on to our next fight. It's the rematch. It could be the best fight in this bracket. Yair Rodriguez, Korean Zombie. I'll open it up with a question for you. If we were trying to line this fight in a rematch, first fight of the tournament, is it a blood and guts fight? Is it going to go to a decision? And what would you have for the odds on it?
So it's kind of interesting, right? Because we all remember the Korean Zombie was winning their first fight, and then Yair pulls out that crazy Hail Mary knockout. And then it's been kind of a weird run for both guys because the Korean Zombies look good, but also look very bad against Brian Ortega. And Yair's coming off of a loss, but I would still say his stock's pretty high right now. So this might be weird because the Zombie's getting a title shot right now, but I think Yair would be the favorite going into their rematch, especially after how good he looked against Max Holloway, I think. So personally, I'd probably have Yair at a minus 180.
Yeah, I'm fine with having Yair Rodriguez. Korean Zombie looked really good against Dan Ige, and he's a guy that's coming up in this bracket, but I think Yair Rodriguez, especially in a bracket format like this, I think he'd be able to get the win, but that is a really, really close fight, and I would love to know. Let us know in the comment section. Who do you have in that fight, and the rest of these fights too, but we're both in agreement with Yair Rodriguez. So far through the bracket, we're in agreement with every single fight, which is probably a bit of a surprise to everybody, including us, but we kind of figured this one out before we taped it. But when we look at the next fight, Dan Ige, Alexander Volkanovski, I look at that fight as 1A, 1C, and there's a B in between somewhere, but I have Volkanovski winning that fight fairly easily.
He's just kind of better at Dan Ige and everything. It's nothing against Dan Ige, but he really set it up perfectly. They're both well-rounded, they're both pretty good at boxing, but Volkanovski has zero weaknesses in his game, where when you look at Dan Ige, some of the top-tier guys have been able to beat him in the past, so no, I agree 100% with that breakdown.
That one, I think, is probably one of the more simple ones. We move into the next fight, and it might be a surprise to some people. Well, geez, you didn't have to beat Magomed Sharipov. I even saw a comment out there, Matt, and I wanted to shout it out right now. I can't remember. It was on Instagram, so I can't pull it up and show it. But somebody had said, Sean Woodson's one of those guys that I think you guys are going to be talking about in a couple of years as a potential ranked guy. I think he's going to make your next bracket when you do your next video, and he very well could be. But to the Zabits and to the rest of the field that didn't quite make it into the top 16, if you haven't been following Mads Burnell since he left the UFC, and again, he lost to Michel Prazeres, who was the biggest guy for the division and couldn't make it anymore. Beat Mike Santiago, which doesn't mean a lot. Loses to Arnold Allen in the third round by submission. Okay, so it wasn't a great run in the UFC, but he's really young at that point. He's gone on to win 7 fights in a row, split between Cage Warriors and Bellator. And if I look at the wins, Cage Warriors, he became, a big-time guy over there. He beat Dean Truman, won their featherweight belt. He fought Steve Amable. And then he goes over to Bellator. He beats Darko Banovic, He beat Saul Rogers, who was on The Ultimate Fighter, and then he beats Emmanuel Sanchez last time out. And people might go, well, yeah, that Emmanuel Sanchez fight was close. Sanchez thought he won the fight by the end of it. All I have to say is, Mads Burnell's been a wrecking ball since he left the UFC. He's one of those guys, to me, I look at it and go, geez, like, you kind of missed it, UFC, which doesn't happen all the time. But I think Mads Burnell in a fight against Max Holloway, I don't think he can rest on his laurels of his submissions and his wrestling against Holloway here.
Well, no one else has ever been able to, so I don't think Mads Burnell would be the first guy. Just Max Holloway's arguably one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the sport. He doesn't even have a belt right now. That tells you sort of everything you need to know about Holloway, and I doubt you need us to talk more to you guys about Max Holloway, but yeah, he's pretty much great across the board. Like you said, Burnell is a great sort of submission grappler, but it'd be really hard for him to get Holloway down to the mat in the first place, and the great thing about Holloway is that, yes, he might not have all of those kind of grappling skills that we look for in champions, but he's got the great counters to them. He's got great footwork. He's got good enough initial takedown defense and great scrambles. So yeah, I like Holloway a lot in this.
And our last fight in the bracket of 16, so to speak, Brian Ortega, Josh Emmett. And for me, I absolutely love a Josh Emmett fight. I get up for it. His fight against Dan Ige was amazing. Very close, albeit. When I look at this fight against Brian Ortega and Emmett, dark horse to the title for the longest time, but when I look at his last few fights, I mean, the Shane Burgos fight, he comes on strong at the end of it. The fight against Ige, really, really close. Taking on a guy like Brian Ortega, improved striking Ortega, black, Chevy Impala Ortega, ordering fast food on Embedded. I think Brian Ortega wins that fight 9.5 times out of 10.
Really? I'm kind of surprised you're so kind of one-sided on this one, because this is what I will say. Brian Ortega is very hittable, and I would not want to be hittable if I was fighting Josh Emmett, because I do agree with you. He does kind of almost set things up a little too well. It's kind of the Uriah Hall problem, where it's like, okay, well, you handily lost round 1, you handily lost round 2, you kind of got to make something happen in round 3, and luckily for Emmett, he does have that kind of power to where if he hits you one time, you kind of see it on the guys' faces. They're just completely out of the fight, but if he did land a big shot on Ortega, I could see him putting him down, but I do agree. Ortega's the better technical guy, and this is what people forget about Brian Ortega, because we haven't really seen a submission win from him in a while. He's probably the best jiu-jitsu practitioner in this weight class. A lot of people, I guess, were reminded of that when he did fight Volkanovski and he had those 2 really close submissions, but if he got Josh Emmett to the ground for even 5 seconds, I would expect him to submit him.
So we're in agreement with all of the picks on this one, and we'll move into the next round. So we move into the round of 8. Again, my bracket on the left-hand side, Matt's is on the right-hand side. The first fight that we have, AJ McKee taking on Patricio Pitbull, and both of us look at this fight. I mean, we had this fight not that long ago, so to speak. It was back in July of last year, and it was a first-round guillotine win for AJ McKee, and I look at this one. Now, this is where it gets squirrely when you look at a bracket like this, because it's all in one night, and you take into account things that are just intangibles outside of all the cage work. AJ McKee, Calvin Kattar is a tough fight. I will admit that. I think AJ McKee wins that fight by decision. Patricio Pitbull, Saladin Palnas. I think Patricio Pitbull wins that fight. Yeah, he might get jabbed a lot. Maybe he gets his wrestling worked a little bit, but I do think Pitbull pulls ahead and even gets a stoppage finish in that fight. Patricio Pitbull in a Grand Prix like this in one night would be so full of piss and vinegar that I think he absolutely blows his load in that first Palnas fight and he loses to McKee.
Yes and no, because I do agree with a lot of what you said. But his brother kind of proved that, like, the Pitbulls can fight in tournaments. His brother fought and won in Ryzen a couple years ago. Now, yes, he jacked his knee up.
Impressively.
Because he messed his knee up really bad in that fight. But I do think Pitbull kind of does have that old school fight mentality to where I disagree with you a little bit. I think it would bring the best out of him. I really do think that his sort of wild fighting style, he'd look at 5 fights in one night and be like, yeah, sure, this is great. I'll get them all done in the first round. And then perfect. It'll just be like fighting one really long fight that night. This is how I look at this fight. I think Patricio would beat Palnas quite easily, and I do think he would get the stoppage, while McKee would get pushed by Kattar. So I think we'd see a slightly lesser version of McKee in this fight, whereas Patricio's probably showing up the regular version of himself. But that's the problem. We kind of know what happens when both these guys show up, let's just say around 100% of each other. AJ McKee destroyed Pitbull in their first fight, and it wasn't close at all. Now, yes, in another fight, if they do ever have that rematch, I expect it to be closer because, well, it'd be really harder for it to be even more one-sided for AJ McKee. So I do think this fight would be a little bit closer, but I still would have McKee being the winner.
All right, so we move into our next fight. Again, both of us in agreement. You have Arnold Allen taking on Mavlid Haibulev. And the craziest thing for Arnold Allen, so he's going from a fight against, well, John Lineker, and then you look at the guys that he's fought in his UFC tenure. Sadiq Yusuff pieced him up on the feet. Nick Lentz, Gilbert Melendez, that fight wasn't even close, and it was really sad.
He did submit Mads Burnell.
He beat Jordan Rinaldi, Mads Burnell, Mako and Amir Khani. He's fought Mako and Amir Khani, Mads Burnell, Jordan Rinaldi, and Nick Lentz. They're all superb grapplers. So I look at that and I go, okay, it gives me a little bit of a pause. And then I think, well, Mavlid Khaybulaev is one of the best to do it, and maybe even the best to ever do it. The best we've seen in a long time at featherweight with his takedowns, with his pressure, with everything that he can do. I look at that guy, and maybe it was in a tournament, but I look at Khaybulaev, and I think he's going to be able to get the win over Arnold Allen in this one.
Again, he very well could, and I do think that this fight would be very closely lined. Like, even if Khaybulaev came to the UFC, this would be a great first fight for him, because kind of like we saw when Justin Gaethje came over, you can't really give a former champion of another organization an immediate title shot. They do have to prove themselves, but they do get to jump the line a little bit, and they get somebody in the top 15. So honestly, I think this would be like the perfect introduction fight for Khaybulaev. But you kind of made my argument for me. Arnold Allen's fought guys like Khaybulaev in the past, and Arnold Allen's whole game is built around figuring out what his opponent doesn't do all that well, and then just making that, or putting a spotlight on those holes. And I do think Arnold Allen would make this fight very boring. I think he would use a lot of his volume on the feet, and I do think he'd be able to win. I'm not saying this would be the greatest fight of all time, but I do think Allen would be able to squeak out a close decision.
So we disagree on our first fight right there. Matt has Arnold Allen moving on. I have Mavlid Khaybulaev moving on. We go to our next one, Yair Rodriguez, Alexander Volkanovski. I mean, hey, you want another one? We're talking second round. That's an amazing fight. Now, Yair's coming off of a rematch with the Korean Zombie in the bracket. You have Volkanovski taking on Dan Ige. I think Volkanovski wins this fight. And it might not be the easiest one, actually. I think this is one of the tougher fights for him in the entire bracket because, yeah, he can work his wrestling, but you just took on a guy like Dan Ige. Depends on where that fight took place. I see that one going to a decision, but...
You just said Volkanovski would destroy him.
Yeah, I think he would be able to get the win. I don't think, he's going to be the most spry guy, but in a fight against Yair Rodriguez, I think that's an amazing fight.
It would be a great fight, and hopefully we can see that for the title at some point. Or this is the weird thing about featherweight. It just feels like the top five, they're all so volatile and all so dangerous that anybody could win the title at any point. Like, I know Ortega lost to Volkanovski, I know Holloway has, but when you look at like the knockout abilities of some of the guys in the top five, like an Emmett, like a Yair Rodriguez, like anybody has that one chance to get the belt. But I do agree, like, when you look at what Yair looked like against Frankie Edgar all the way back in UFC 211, you can't tell me Volkanovski couldn't do the exact same thing to him. A very high-volume takedown game plan, go for a lot of ground and pound, probably open up a submission at some point. I just think stylistically this is one of the tougher matchups for Yair. If he was able to keep it on the feet, then yeah, he would make Volkanovski's life very difficult, but I do like Volkanovski because I think we've just seen the game plan be used on Yair in the past, and I don't think Volkanovski's a worse wrestler at 120 or at 145, than Frankie Edgar was.
Then we have Max Holloway in the rematch with Brian Ortega, and T-City's gotten so much better since that first fight. And then we saw Max Holloway go out there and fight Calvin Kattar, and we saw Calvin Kattar just get absolutely destroyed. And then he looked great against Giga Chikadze. So you lose to Max Holloway, you get a lot better, and apparently maybe it comes with age, maybe it comes with practice, self-reflection, whatever it is, but Ortega's coming off a fight against Josh Emmett, and I think he's going to be able to handle that one quite well. But again, I see the rematch against Holloway going a little bit like the first one.
Well, if Max Holloway did fight Mads Burnell, he probably has to defend 2 takedowns, keep the fight in the center of the cage, and he probably doesn't get hit once. That's my way of being nice, but he's that much better at striking than Mads Burnell. So he probably wouldn't take a lot of damage on the feet if he did fight Burnell. Whereas if Ortega fought Emmett and he gets dropped in that fight, then we're going to have a lesser version of him fighting Max Holloway. And even Ortega, with like the best chin possible going in to fight Max Holloway, got hit 500 times and the doctor had to stop it. So I do think Holloway just stylistically is a tough matchup for Ortega because he eliminates the opportunity for a takedown and he's so volume heavy on the feet. So I like Holloway quite a bit.
So in the round of 8, the only difference we have the Khaybulaev-Arnold Allen fight, and that'll take us to our next round, the round of 4. We have, in my side of the bracket, AJ McKee and Mavlid Khaybulaev. I have Volkanovski Holloway. You also have Volkanovski Holloway. You have AJ McKee and Arnold Allen. I'll start with you. AJ McKee, Arnold Allen. Really interesting fight. I mean, for you, you have Allen just coming over a win against Mavlid Haibulev. Before that, John Lineker. And for McKee, again, Calvin Kattar and Patricio Pitbull. So it's been a tough road for both of these guys. Who do you have winning that fight?
So this is the weird thing. And I guess it depends on how you want to kind of grade the damage in your mind and how you want to carry it over. Because for me, I think that Kattar fight is a tough fight. I could see McKee getting hit with some big shots. I could even see him getting stunned at some point in that matchup with Kattar. But I don't think the one against Pitbull would be that tough on him. So in my mind, he's got like a 3-hour window to kind of, recover a little bit from the Kattar fight. Then he's got the Patricio one. Not an easy fight, but I doubt he eats at least the sustained amount of volume that Kattar would bring to him. So against Arnold Allen, I think we've got a slightly diminished version of AJ McKee, but I don't think he's eaten a lot of big shots in the feet. And let's say his cardio is at about 70% of where I normally think it is. I just think Arnold Allen's the most tired man in the world by this point, because even if he does beat Haibulev, he's defending takedowns for 12 minutes of that fight, and he's on his horse for the other 10 minutes, throwing out a lot of volume and just trying to be dynamic in that matchup. So for me, I honestly think he could have a long fight with AJ McKee. It wouldn't be competitive, I don't think, because McKee does move a lot better than Allen does on the feet, but to me, I think he could probably last all 5 rounds. He would be a punching bag, but I do think Arnold Allen could have a competitive fight with AJ McKee after the 2 fights they'd previously had this evening.
So you've got McKee winning, and then...
But yes, I do have McKee moving on, and probably by stoppage in like the 4th or 5th round, but I think it would go late.
For me, it's the same thing. I mean, Haibulev has taken on Arnold Allen. He's taken on Giga Chikadze, and he's wrestled himself into exhaustion. So we get the most diminished version of him. I mean, yeah, he's lost a fight to Daniel Pineda very close. It was a no contest, or very close, very quickly. It ended in a no contest. Daniel Pineda was on some under the table stuff, and he has a draw against Andre Harrison, and you talk about a couple of guys that can wrestle over with PFL. So I do look at this as Haibulev's just absolutely emptied the tank, and it should be a fairly easy fight for AJ McKee. So both of us have McKee going to the finals. And then if we look at our fight, Volkanovski-Holloway, this is the 3rd iteration, but for Volkanovski, he's taken on, Dan Ige, Yair Rodriguez. For Holloway, it's been Ortega, it's been Burnell. I would think Holloway may be the more rested guy out of the two of them.
It all depends on how much you want to weigh the Ortega fight, because to me, Holloway did eat a lot of shots in the first Ortega fight. Yes, he beat the brakes off Brian Ortega, and I'm not going to sit here and even argue that Ortega, he may have won a round. It's been a while since I've watched that fight, but we all remember it. It was very one-sided, and it was towards Max Holloway. But I do think that would be a tough fight for him, and we've seen him fight Volkanovski before, and we know that Volkanovski is the better guy. I know they fought for a total of 10 rounds, and a lot of people think that they are kind of 5 rounds each apiece right now, but still, their record does have Volkanovski winning 2 fights to 0 for Holloway. So for me, Volkanovski, I don't think would have to work very hard in the Dan Ige fight, because he's just sort of better than him at everything, and I don't think he'd have to worry about eating a lot of damaging shots. And against Yair, I think he would wrestle quite a bit. So to me, Volkanovski isn't very damaged at this point in my bracket, so I do think he'd be able to beat Holloway, because Holloway would at least have that one really difficult fight with Ortega, where at least I can rationalize, okay, I think Volkanovski could have an easy fight with Ige. And here, if you think Volkanovski, Yair Rodriguez is an absolute bloodbath, I can't disagree with you, but I think he would kind of pick the Frankie Edgar game plan and just go for a lot of wrestling.
And I think at this point, Volkanovski's got a really, really hard fight against Holloway, because I see that Dan Ige fight going tit for tat. It's a close one. It goes the distance, and Volkanovski's able to get the win, sure. He goes up against Yair Rodriguez, whether he gets pieced up a little bit in the striking, or he is able to implement that wrestling game plan. A little bit of damage, the cardio is going to be depleted, and then you have a fight against Max Holloway again, and we're talking about a Max Holloway that's fresh off a win over Mads Burnell and Brian Ortega with a bit of a psychological advantage. If you have Holloway winning this fight, I can't discredit you one bit, because all of this is hypothetical, but I look at this fight as, okay, Alexander Volkanovski wins this fight, but he is hanging on by a thread. So that takes...
But here's the thing, and I felt like we should say this, because the damage carries over. Volkanovski didn't get hit clean a lot in any of the 10 rounds that him and Holloway had, so I don't know if that fight against Holloway would be that difficult, because honestly, they were 10 really smart rounds. I know in the second fight, he gets hurt by an uppercut and by a knee, but other than those 2 moments against Holloway, all 10 of their rounds were very close. That's why, to me, I don't actually think the Holloway fight would take a lot out of him. I think it would be mentally draining more than physically depleting.
So, that takes us to the fact that we both have a finals of AJ McKee and Alexander Volkanovski. Let the cat out of the bag with the picks. Here we go. Look at that. On my bracket, I've got AJ McKee winning the whole damn thing, and Matt has Alexander Volkanovski. And if I can back my point up here, McKee's taking on a tough level competition. Calvin Kattar, Patricio Pitbull, and then he goes out there and takes on Mavlid Haibulev, who again, you talk about a guy on his last legs after 2 fights. I think McKee cruises and gets an easy first round finish in that one. So he's a little bit fresher. When I look at Volkanovski, I've got him fighting Danny Ye, not the hardest matchup in the bracket. Yair Rodriguez, a little bit tougher. Max Holloway, very tough. He gets to the end. I have him as the more depleted man. And I think for those reasons, McKee is so damn tricky when you try and take him down. He can defend with submissions. He can defend with just his regular old takedown defense. And when it comes to the striking, at that point, I don't even think it's even. I think McKee is able to draw ahead just based on the guys that Volkanovski's fought. So for me, I've got AJ McKee winning the whole bracket of 16.
So before I give my little final breakthrough, who would you favor? If these guys fought at 100% Bellator champ versus UFC champ, where would you put the odds?
I'd say Volkanovski in public support. He's probably 2-1, minus 250.
Okay, so who
like
would you have in the fight if they just fought at 100%?
Probably Volkanovski. Okay. But I'd have him ever so slightly.
Fair enough. I just wanted to ask because I do have Volkanovski in the finals because, like I said, against Holloway, I don't think he'd need a crazy amount of damage. I definitely think he would. Don't get me wrong. Fighting Max Holloway for 25 minutes is probably one of the least enjoyable experiences an MMA fighter could ever put themselves through. But still, I just think his wrestling and his own well-roundedness would be really tough for AJ McKee because Volkanovski is the thing that we never talk about, but boy, is it important in MMA. He's compact. Because when you're compact, nobody has a strength advantage over you. And the great thing about Volkanovski is, even when he is at his most tired, I know kind of the type of fighter I'm going to get from him. Like, Volkanovski in round 1 of a fight where he hasn't taken any damage, or round 5 of a fight where he's thrown 500 strikes and he's taken a lot of damage, is still kind of the same fighter. So for me, I'd have Volkanovski to win this finals. But I would love to see this fight. If we could somehow get AJ McKee and Alexander Volkanovski in a cage together, it would just fix the world, I think. Like, that's the type of fight we would be dealing with.
Drew Cliff over in the YouTube community tab agrees. He says Volkanovski because he fights smart and takes the least amount of damage possible. We threw it out there in the community tab saying Parry Counter is back. And who's going to win the one-man tournaments? 50% of the total votes went with Volkanovski, 36% Holloway, 3% Haibulev, 8% McKee, and 3% the field. Don't Panic said Volk fights smarter and has more ways to win. Andrew saying not Max. He would win any one-on-one, but he takes so much damage he wouldn't be alive by the end of the tournament. Finley Galbraith saying Volkanovski the most diverse game, and Sam saying the Holloway bias on the internet is so annoying. So Sam, we didn't have Holloway getting the win, but let us know what you thought of the entire bracket down below in the comment section. I mean, listen, we'll be back. We'll have some more brackets as the year goes on.
And tell us what divisions you want to see. Like, we thought featherweight would be a fun one to start with. Got big names.
Maybe welterweight might be next. Who knows?
There you go. But yeah, you guys let us know what you want us to rank and break down, and we'll try the best to sort of incorporate the community more into these videos.
100%. I mean, I can't wait for it. Parry Counter, it's the opportunity for us to have the conversation with you folks out there. So let us know down below in the comment section what you like, what you didn't like, and future topics that you'd like to see carried over on the channel, because listen, if we're popping this thing off in 2022 with Fight Night Picks, it's got to be with the stuff and the content like this, and it's the stuff that we really enjoy making. So let us know down below. Toss a like and a sub. We got some great fights coming up this year, and as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.